Welcome to the Honest Health Podcast with your host, Jeffrey Burke. Honest Health brings you the brightest minds in the natural products industry, as well as athletes and entertainers. Jeff will keep you entertained and informed while educating on how to be successful on your healthy journeys. Now, here's your host, Jeffrey Burke.
Hello and welcome back to the Honest Health Podcast. My name is Jeffrey Burke. I'm so glad you're here. This is my new platform. Well, it's about a little over a year old now and it's doing fantastic. I bring you the groundbreaking information from some of the best minds within the natural product industry, as well as voices from outside the industry too. All of them with a message and stories to share, because in my mind and my heart, everybody brings something to the table. As you tune into the podcast, if you like what I'm doing, please consider giving me a like, a share, or subscribe, or better yet, do all three of them. We want to make sure that we're visible and getting the word out and just making sure that we are spreading all this good information. And I think that it's really important today. My guest today is my very longtime friend, Neil Levin. You'll see from the description of the program, he is definitely a talent to be reckoned with, an amazing history. He has done so many things in this industry that have just made such a difference, and I have done so many radio shows with him over the years, and every single one of them has been an absolute pleasure. So help me introduce and welcome my friend. Hey, Neil.
Nice to be with you, Jeffrey. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Welcome back, and it's great to have you, and you're a wealth of information. You know, I've been a fan for a very, very long time, and I think you're definitely one of those industry icons that I get the wonderful pleasure to talk with. So thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule.
Always a pleasure, and I'm always glad to see you when we're traveling and end up at the same event.
It's always a good thing. So today, I kind of alluded a little bit on social media. We were going to be talking about essential oils today, aromatherapy, and I love this category. You know, when I went back to school, I had to take an extra class in aromatherapy and essential oils, and I was kind of like, yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll do this. But by the time I got done with the class, I was totally wrapped up in it. I learned so much. I completely underestimated the power and the effects of essential oils, and I had a brand new perspective. And ever since that time, I've become a huge fan of essential oils. And I thought what we could do today is maybe talk about the clarity of essential oils, that they're not all created equal, maybe how blending them could actually add to the synergistic effects, how to use them, when to use them, whether they need to be, cut with an oil of some kind. And I would love to start any place you'd like to start, sir.
Well, let's define essential oils, first of all. Essential oils are something we all enjoy in everyday life, and you don't even realize it. When you smell something cooking, you smell a flower. You go outside after rain, you smell the air. You are actually ingesting fragrances that are lighter than air. They're floating through the air. They're volatile, is the term. And they enter your nose. They've hit receptors. The receptors send signals directly to the brain, and the brain reacts to them immediately. And you get hunger or disgust or memory or pleasure or different signals from what you're smelling. There's actually molecules that are being sampled by your nose, by your brain. And your body is reacting to them based on basic instinct as well as remembered things. Something might give you pleasure. You smell something baking and it reminds you of your grandma baking, or some other event. You smell a certain flower, it reminds you of a date you were on, or the memories come with the sense. So there's an emotional component to smelling things. There's a subconscious reaction to all these things that are immediate. And so what you're smelling are these very fine molecules that volatilize. They float through the air. And when you think about it, clouds float through the air. Water vapor floats through the air. And it's interesting when you're hearing about, say, a baseball player hitting a home run, that the ball actually goes farther in high humidity air which you think, okay, there's water in there, it's going to be heavier or thicker. No, it's actually lighter because the stuff is lighter than air. It's floating. And so the baseball can go farther. And in the same way, these molecules float through the air and just evaporate from the plants. So you have specific, when we sell essential oils, we're selling specific oils that are produced from a certain genus and species of plant, a specific part of the plant, and a specific processing to remove those oils. And some essential oils are pure evaporated volatile oils. Other ones are mixtures where they're not all evaporative. They're not all floating through the air. In other words, some of them are going to remain. If you use a diffuser, which is, there's various types of diffusers which are used to draw up the oil and evaporate it, help it, encourage it to get into the air so you could smell it more. It could be a reed diffuser where you simply put some reeds into some oil and they'll soak it up and help it disperse and evaporate it. There's active versions of diffusers, which we'll discuss in a while, I believe. But you're getting a way to sample these scents. Everyone's familiar with perfumes, colognes. Perfumes are about 10% essential oils in general. So they're often a blend of essential oils with other types of oils, but you're using them, and 10% is actually very strong. When we're mixing essential oils into massage oils or things like that, we're often between 0.5% and 5% essential oil in those kind of formulas. And we could talk about that later in this interview. So you have these specific plants. Let's say you have lavender oil, which is one of the more popular ones. Lavender is used in perfumes. Now, again, it's about 10% lavender in there, but there's also different cultivars of plants. And I'm sure people are familiar with, there's different types of roses that are all in the same species with different scents and colors. There's different kinds of tomatoes, which are in the same species, or apples that are different colors and the way they look, the way they taste. So in the same way, you could have different cultivars of herbaceous plants like lavender. And so lavender is, there's certain cultivars that are used primarily for perfumes, and those are not the ones we use for aromatherapy. And the reason why is they breed out through selective breeding the more medicinal fractions of the oil. And so you have a pure floral scent, for example, and you've bred out the maybe 5%, give or take a few percent, medicinal compounds such as camphor. Camphor you might be familiar with as the chest rubs or the things you use to open the breathing passages. And there's a certain natural component of that, and it's often, between, say, 3 and 7% of the lavender oil on many of the traditional aromatherapy cultivars, the varieties that are grown. But they breed out and get them below 1% for the perfumes. We don't want those in aromatherapy. We want the therapeutic aspects of the plants, which include the full spectrum and not these reduced spectrum that they want for specific purposes. We're not selling perfumes, although people will use these oils to make their own perfumes and things. We're selling aromatherapy products. So you have these plants, and how do you get the oil out of them? They evaporate readily. So let's say something like lavender or peppermint, these leafy things or flowers that are you're extracting the essential oils from. Most of them are done through steam distillation. And that's a process where you take the fresh herb, and when I say fresh, you normally have to do it within 12 to 24 hours after harvest before the oils start evaporating significantly from the plants. You want to get them when they're very fresh. And they're put into a stainless steel vessel, and steam is applied through there. and it carries up the volatile fractions, the oils that are lighter than air that are capable of giving you scent. And they then are cooled down and separate into oil and water. And that oil, when it's separated, is an essential oil. That's your basic essential oil. That's how most of them are produced. Now, because in general, they have to be done when they're fresh, our lavender oil from France has to be distilled in France, very close to the fields where they're grown. Peppermint oil from India is the same way. They have to do it in India. You can't harvest it and ship it somewhere and distill it days later or weeks later. It has to be done while it's fresh.
Now, there's a window.
Yes, it's a very narrow window, so distillers and growers work very closely together for most of these. Now, there are other essential oils that are made from roots or crystallized sap like sandalwood that can be shipped somewhere else and distilled. For example, sandalwood is typically shipped to Italy or Europe and distilled there rather than in the areas around the equator or north of the equator where they're grown. So that's the one aspect of them. Another production method is using cold pressing, and that is primarily done for the citrus fruits because we're using the oils from the rind, the zest. So if you've ever used like orange zest or lemon zest where you grate the peel, and the oil there that gives you that scent is an essential oil, but it's not a pure essential oil. When you cold press this, and they wash the fruit, it goes down a conveyor. They use the spiked wheels to press the oil out of them. And because they're pressing it, it's not all volatile oils. There's other oils in there as well. And that's why a cold pressed oil will tend to leave a little bit of residue in a diffuser because it doesn't all evaporate. It's not readily volatile. So most of it is, but a little bit of it is not. So, and it's raw, so it's not distilled. There's another method which is called an absolute oil. And that's a terminology for essential oils that are produced by solvent extraction. And the reason they're using solvent extraction, they're using very delicate, very expensive flowers to get the oils. And the only two we have that are called absolutes, and they're clearly labeled that way on the bottle, are the rose and the jasmine. And if you think of pure distilled rose oil, would probably cost you between $100 and $200 an ounce if you were to buy it. There's a reason why they use solvent extraction. You get a lot more yield out of these petals. I mean, it could take 100,000 rose petals to give you an ounce of rose oil, for example. You're talking about a massive amount. By distillation, with solvent extraction, you get a lot more yield at a lot better price. So the solvent they typically use is hexane, and it produces what's called a concrete. And it's called concrete because it's solid at room temperature. So why is it solid at room temperature? Because they're extracting both the essential oil and the waxes with that method. Then they evaporate the hexane to reclaim it and reuse it. And they have a second step where they use ethanol, alcohol, to separate the wax and the essential oil. And then, of course, the alcohol will evaporate, and they'll reclaim that for reuse and be left with a raw essential oil that's a pure essential oil. You can do a fatty acid profile, and you see it's the pure essential oil. It's very basically identical to what you get from distillation, but it's gone through a two-step process using solvents. And that's why we use the terminology absolute oil rather than essential oil, but it really is an essential oil, just a different method of production. There's one essential oil we use a different technique, and that is CO2 or carbon dioxide extraction. And supercritical extraction is where the liquid carbon dioxide, pressurized and cold, very cold, is used to extract specific fractions. It's not a holistic extraction of the oils. It's a specific extraction of a fraction. And in this case, we're looking for the vanillin, the main flavor and scent compound in vanilla, and trying to isolate that. So there's only one we do CO2 extraction because it will not. It's not a full spectrum method of extraction. It won't give you a whole essential oil. I mean, there are dozens and dozens of compounds in these oils normally that you're looking for. So you don't want to extract the only the nonpolar fractions if you're familiar with chemistry. So there's one that's done by CO2 extraction. There's two that's done by the solvent extraction, the absolutes. There's several of the citrus oils and a few others like neem oil that are done by cold pressing. But in general, the steam distillation is the method of choice for essential oils. So that's the basic production area. Now you have to, how do you know what you're getting and the testing? Well, there are standards and monographs used by industry. And there's things like Fenaroli's Handbook of Flavor Ingredients. There's the Tisserand and Young Essential Oil Safety Book. There's a Burdock Book of Essential Oils, and there's a number of other things, including some ISO, International Standards Organization monographs, which apply to only certain oils like tea tree oil, where you have a monograph or basic descriptions that tell you all the tests you need to do to show that it's the right oil. It's the specific genus, species, part of the plant oil that's been extracted. So we look at a chemical fingerprint, which is an infrared spectrum analysis. We do a full fatty acid analysis. And this is very important because we're looking at, it's kind of like a bar chart with a bunch of lines on it that shows you which compounds are found and how much of each. And if something is spiked, one of these will be out of proportion to what it's supposed to be. One of these spikes on the graph will be oversized, or in some cases undersized. And we see that sometimes, like we've seen where peppermint oil has been adulterated with something called pigment oil. An oil, a peppermint, a mint plant that's eaten by pigs, in other words, in the wild. So pigment, not pigment like the color. So
I get you.
Yeah. So we'll see an alternate type of mint in there to juice up the menthol, which is one of the main constituents in mint oils. But it's out of proportion to everything else. It's not the right proportion for a specific genus and species. So we're looking at the fatty acid profile is very important. There's other tests we do. Specific gravity looks at the density of the oil, and there's very narrow ranges of density for each oil that's distinct. There's also something called refractive index, and that's where you take a certain amount of the oil and you put it in a glass container and you shine a wavelength of light through it and you measure the way the light bends as it passes through. There's an angle it makes as it passes through, and that has to do with the pigments and things in there and the density. And it's, again, unique. The narrow range for each oil is unique. So we apply a whole range of testing, but we also do sensory testing. We have personal care and oil chemists on staff that will open up the samples. They'll smell it. They'll compare it to previous lots and things like that. I'll tell you an interesting story, because a few years ago, we had a customer in New York State who was purchasing our peppermint oil and using it topically for some kind of skin condition. I assume he was diluting it or something. And we had changed our labels. We went from a colored label to a white label with a photograph of the plant. And we're very very careful to use the right genus and species and part of the plant on the color photo on this white label. In the case of
Those are
organic,
very detailed.
right?
Very detailed. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and on organic oils, there's a green tint instead of white, and there's the USDA logo on there. USDA certified organic. So he said, "You changed the label. I know you changed the oil. It's not going to work right anymore." And I said, "Well, let me check on that. I don't have any record we have a new supplier or anything." So I contacted our supplier. This is an oil that is imported from basically a perfume supplier in Italy, but they have an office in New Jersey or somewhere on the East Coast. So I called the office and talked to somebody, and he got back to me the next day. He said, we talked to the main place where they, collect all these oils. It's lavender oil, so it's from Europe. And they pulled retained samples from every lot we had purchased from them for the past year. And they had their trained chemists who are scent chemists, like perfume chemists. So they know how to sample by smelling, just like someone who's familiar with wine can tell wines or something. And they said they did not detect any significant difference between batches over the last year. There was really no change. And one thing people don't realize about the lavender oil, we're the largest purchaser of lavender oil on earth. I've been told by one of our chemists that a supplier told us that we buy about half of all the lavender oil produced on the planet. Our one company. And we're selling it internationally, not just in the United States. And that company actually blends incoming batches of lavender oil for consistency. And that's not true for all the oils. That's not true for every supplier of every oil. But the reason that's done is because a lot of these oils are used by people making their own things. The do-it-yourself people, the people making crafts, even businesses are buying our oils and using them in production. So they want some consistency from lot to lot. If you think about how a wine is different every harvest, olive oils can change. Natural botanicals, because of the difference in climate from year to year, in the weather conditions, the sun, all the environmental issues, there is some natural variation. They're trying to minimize the variation by blending different incoming lots, so that when people are using this to make products, people are not going to complain. This one's a lot more camphory and this one's a lot more floral, and they're not all going to smell the same. They're getting consistency. That's not true for the oils that are produced in smaller batches, for the more boutique oils. The organic lavender oil, they don't really do that. There's going to be a little more variation, but of course, they're typically from the same farms. There won't be super variation. But we've even tested like eucalyptus oil, same genus, species, part of the plant, from 3 different brands, and then we overlay them, looking at the profiles, and they line up very nicely. There's as much variation between brands as there is between batch to batch within our own brand. So that's how close these tend to mimic. That's how good, like other brands like Oracacia and Windmere, very good brands. We sell about twice as much oil as any of them, but they're very good brands and very reputable, and they're basically using the same testing, and we're using the same types of testing as the producers of the oils, by the way. They're following the same standards, but there's not a huge difference in typically between brands on these, unless you're getting, there's a couple other weird variations like chemotypes or phenotypes, where let's say on thyme oil, THYME, you might have different ratios because of the genetics of different varieties. Some of them will have a stronger scent in one direction than another. One of the components will be stronger in one chemotype or phenotype. So that's something that we pay attention to a little bit in terms of labeling them for toxicity, that kind of thing. And that is an issue, not just toxicity, but phototoxicity is one concern. For example, citrus oils, to various amounts depending on the citrus type, can give you photosensitivity if you use it in a massage oil, for example. And so we have a toxicologist on staff. We're very careful to label these appropriately as keeping out of the sun, but it's going to vary between brands, not between types of oil. You know, bergamot oil might do that to a greater extent than lime oil or that kind of thing. So, you know, that's another consideration. So then you have these oils, and we're packaging them in 1 ounce, 30 milliliter, 600 drop bottles. That's about double the size of most of our competitors, and we're typically half the price. And it's not because we're skimping on the oils or the quality, it's because our economies of scale. I've found our essential oils in catalogs going back 1991. We've been selling essential oils. So a really long time. You know, we have a long-term relationships. We're a huge customer for these guys. So, you know, we have an advantage in buying in terms of volume discounts and everything else. But essential oils are historically part of the perfume industry, and they're an offshoot of the perfume industry. You have any idea how much perfumes are marked up? You know, there's a huge markup, and we don't play the same game. We are marking it up more like a vitamin. And our competitors might mark it up 4 times as much, 6 times as much, 10 times as much for the same oils. And so one of the reasons they'll tend to do that is because if they're sold through a multi-level or network marketing, every layer of that market's distribution chain has to make a markup. So they have to mark it up enough to make that make up the money that everyone has to make from there. We're selling direct to stores. We're cutting out the middleman in essence and keeping the margins lower as a result.
Let me ask you a couple of questions. The first one is, why do your oils last so much longer, the smell in the air? Because I've gone back and forth between quite a few different brands, and I'm a huge proponent of Now Foods, your products, your oils, everything. You know that. And but it seems like when I use the Now Foods oils in my diffusers, it lasts so much longer than other ones that I've tried, their oils, using them the same exact way. I mean, even sometimes I'll walk out of the room and I'll walk back in and I'm like, I just can't believe I could still smell this. It's lasted, the sustainability of the aroma is there so much longer. Is it because of the purity? Is it because of the concentration?
Well, our oils have been accused by people who are, especially people who are selling the multi-level products, of being adulterated, cut with something else, diluted, inferior rejects from suppliers, any excuse they could think of to justify why they're marking theirs up so much and putting them in such tiny little bottles, which is the perfume model. I mean, that's natural. That's what most of the industry has historically done. It's just, homie, don't play that. We have a different method of doing of treating it. Our mission at Now is to provide value, the best quality for the best price in both products and services that empower people to lead healthier lives. And what that means is we're taking a much lower markup. We're the biggest family-owned independent company in the whole natural products industry. And we're there for the long term, not for short-term profits. And the family does not need to make huge profits. They're making sufficient, but on average, like our company is making about half the profit margin of our competitors in general. And on essential oils, it's far less. So that is our mission statement. That is our positioning. That is our branding that we're doing. So that's why we could have a bottle like our Nature's Shield, which is 5 oils. It's been used for centuries as a way to purify the air and make the air more cleaner to breathe. The legend is that it's often called thieves' oil, and the legend is during the Black Death, the plague in Europe, that thieves would go into the homes of people who had died of the plague, where everyone else was afraid to go in there. They would wear these gourds over these faces, these masks stuffed with essential oil plants, and breathe through those plants to filter the air and stop themselves from getting sick. So we have the same 5 oils as some of these multi-level brands that are very popular. We actually call it Nature's Shield rather than thieves' oil. And I actually suggested, this is not a joke, that we call it Pirate's Oil and have a picture of a guy who looks like Captain Jack Sparrow from Pirates from the Caribbean on the front. And that was vetoed. I didn't get that in. But
I see the veto coming on that one.
Yeah.
Still a great idea though.
And we didn't want to call it thieves' oil because we didn't want to steal the name, even though it's centuries old. So we called it Nature's Shield. But when we came out with it, we had a bottle twice as big, half the price of our main competitor, and we had several organic oils in there where theirs were all conventional. So that just shows you the difference. We're using high quality oils, higher quality if you want to consider organics higher quality, and still able to undercut them both in size and price.
Okay, here's another question for you. How do you decide if the essential oil that you're using can be taken internally? Because you see recipes and candies and things where people do use them, but how do you make that decision? Or is it safe not to? Is it smart not to? Or do you have to kind of walk on tender ground, if you will?
Well, that's a 2-part question. First of all, there's regulations. And the federal government, the FDA, has regulations on what's allowed to be called a food. And that's what they call generally regarded as safe, GRAS, which is often referred to as GRAS status. Generally regarded as safe. That is in the Code of Federal Regulations, defines certain products as foods. Now, for essential oils, in order to be GRAS, they have to be diluted to the level that is safe for everyday use without toxicity. That is not 1 drop of peppermint oil. 1 drop of peppermint oil is about 100 times stronger than you would use in a product that you would take internally. There is no way to use a household measurement and divide 1 drop by 100. It just doesn't work. So technically, full strength essential oils are food grade, but they're not GRAS. They're not safe to label as foods unless they're safely diluted. Now, I looked at the GRAS listing for peppermint oil. And I actually, in my presentation where I train on essential oils, I made a slide on this showing what percentage of common foods that contain peppermint oil, everything from chewing gum and mints, and there was about 8 or 10 different foods on there. What percentage of them are essential oils on the GRAS list? The highest one, the highest percentage, the highest concentration of essential oil, peppermint oil, in a food is peppermint gum. What percentage would you guess that is?
0.1%?
It's 0.83% or something like that. It's less than 1%. Wow. Essential oil in the strongest one. The strongest one that's allowed to be sold as a food. So you can't simply legally or ethically slap a label on there saying 1 drop of peppermint oil is nutrition facts, it's a food, supplement facts, it's a supplement. You could do that, but it's not legal and it's not safe. Now, I say it's not safe because I know personally of at least 2 instances where we were notified, and my company handles adverse events for the company. So I know of at least 2 instances in the years we've done it where someone was putting a drop of peppermint oil in their water every day or tea and drinking it. And in about a month, they end up in the emergency room. The menthol strips away the mucus lining of their esophagus and stomach, and they go into the emergency room with stomach pains. 1 drop a day is too strong. So we do have, if you type in GRAS at nowfoods.com, you can get a list of essential oils that are food grade. We're not going to label them as foods. We're going to say not for internal use on the bottle because at that concentration, they're not considered foods. The product itself is not considered a food at that strength. It's food grade, but it's not a strength. It's not a food.
Got it.
You can't label it with the food things. And the FDA does not allow multiple categories of claims on the label. And what I mean by that is we wanted to have, say, magnesium salts labeled as both for bath and for for topical use and internal use, say. You can't do that on certain. Castor oil would be a good example. We went to the FDA with some sample labels. Here's dual labeling for castor oil for internal use and external use, topical use. No, you can't do that. Well, we see Epsom salt sold. Yeah, but that's a drug claim. That's an approved drug claim. They're not going to approve claims for mixing other categories. We sell the same almond oil in one package for massage oil, for a carrier oil, they call it. They call it carrier because it will carry an essential oil scent if you add the essential oil to it. So almond oil would be one of these so-called carrier oils, but it's also a food oil. So we have one label for foods and a separate label for topical use because we're not allowed to have both on the same label. We were rejected. So we have to jump through all these regulatory hoops, and especially since we export to about 100 countries, we need FDA document to be allowed to export. We can't just ship something overseas. We have to have approval from our government and from the receiving government. So the government's looking at our label and saying, is this a legal label? And if we start doing these dual categories or even saying food grade on a massage oil, they reject it. This is not a legal label. Companies are doing that, but they're not submitting their labels to the FDA for review. They are not being rejected, and they are not aware, maybe, that they are violating the law by slapping nutrition facts, supplement facts on pure essential oils or calling them food grade when they're sold for aromatherapy. These are illegal practices that companies are getting away with because the FDA enforcement tends to be weak in that area.
You know, the interesting thing about these oils is it's always amazed me how smelling a scent, and I think you alluded to this at the very beginning, how smelling a scent, of course, it can bring back a memory. It could stimulate a craving. It could stimulate a feeling. But it's just amazing how smelling something, and I don't know if that's the power of our nose or it's our brain, or maybe using the nose to get to our brain that triggers those emotions. But there are certain scents that I smell, and they take me back to the time when I was a kid. And those are things that don't go away. You can trigger those responses. And I love that about essential oils because obviously I try to use the ones that have a good response rather than bring a bad memory. But that being said, it's amazing the power of aromatherapy and essential oil.
Well, you have to think about the evolutionary aspect of why are there volatile molecules floating through the air? Maybe they're originally to attract pollinators. Maybe they're to discourage predators of the plant, things that would attack the plant. Maybe for humans, they're part of our system to distinguish what's safe or not safe to consume. I look in my yard and sometimes there are deer out there, rabbits, whatever. They have no verbal skills. how do they know which plants to eat and which plants not to eat? They have to be able to smell them, maybe take a minor taste, but a lot of it's by smell rather than sight. They might have there are plants that look similar, in terms of leaves or something. They're not botanists. They have some instinctual way to tell. And one of the main ways they could tell is by these scents floating through the air. So part of our primitive brain, our limbic system, is sensitive to these scents and responds to these scents. And we've now overlaid our memories and experiences onto the original thing that's passed on through our genes.
Just happy that you guys have done and have been so successful with the essential oils, because I use a lot of them. I talk about them a lot because number one, they're an amazing value. Number two, they're extremely, just wonderfully potent, and the smells are so strong and so soothing, and they do what they're supposed to do. I did have one question somebody wanted me to ask you. Do they expire?
Yeah, but most of them are very stable. You're looking at 5 years or more. And as long as you can smell the scent, they're still effective. I mean, it's not like they tend to have a natural antioxidant complex in the complexity of their chemistry, where some of these essential oils are actually used as preservatives. For example, rosemary oil is a very common preservative that's used in supplements. So, you have that aspect of them being stable. And I believe we have started putting best by dates, not expiration dates, on the oils. But it also depends on how long they've been open, since you broke the seal. How often do you open it? Under what environmental conditions in terms of humidity and things that could get in there? Really, if there's not moisture getting in to any extent, then they tend to keep. And as long as you can smell it, you're probably going to have most of the benefits of it. And I would say in general, 4 to 5 years is not uncommon for them to be okay.
Do you have a preference that you recommend for a carrier oil, whether it's avocado oil, almond oil? I mean, do you have a preference? Do they all suit well, or is it different?
No, they are somewhat different, and I believe we have a chart on our web page showing carrier oils. And if you're using for skincare, for example, the universal one is jojoba oil. It will work on any skin type. The other one is vegetable glycerin, which is not a vegetable oil. It's a fraction of the typically the palm coconut oils, but it's like only a fraction. It's not the whole oil. So those two are good for all skin types. When I'm looking at the chart, apricot oil works on everything but dry skin. An oil is not great for dry skin. Looking at sesame oil, it's good for everything but oily acne prone skin.
Is coconut oil ever used as a carrier oil?
Coconut oil is used, and it is only good for normal and dry skin. It's not so good for combination, oily acne, sensitive, or mature skin.
Okay.
So this chart is very useful.
I prefer jojoba. I mean, for me, it's always been my preference oil.
Jojoba oil is interesting. It's a desert shrub, but its composition is very, very close to the oil in the skin and the scalp, like sebum in the scalp. And in fact, jojoba oil is a traditional remedy for dandruff because like dissolves like is a basic chemistry maxim. And if you have like clogged follicles on the scalp and they're clogged with sebum, with the oil that's solidified, using a jojoba rinse or jojoba oil massaged into the scalp will dissolve that and allow the hair to grow back normally, and will also remove the dandruff. So dandruff shampoos in the natural sphere, the natural products industry, have often used jojoba oil as a base, and dandruff treatments have often used jojoba. But it's good for the skin as well as the scalp, because it's the same kind of oil in both areas. And that's one of the reasons why jojoba oil is so it's good to use it, but people don't know about these uses. They don't realize that it's good for all skin types. You don't have to worry about that because it is basically using the skin oil on the skin.
The other thing that you guys do that is so wonderful in as far as your information and paying it forward are you have wonderful blended combinations for different smells. As we go into the holidays, I tell people all the time, go there because they've got all these wonderful recipes. They tell you how many drops to use. They give you it just so many blended combinations on. I've done many of them. And I just always kind of go back to the Christmas ones, the holiday ones I love so much. I sometimes use those throughout the year. But the thing is, they're wonderful, and you make it so easy, and so they get the benefit of the quality of the product. They get the transparency of the company. They get the wonderful potency of the oils. They get things that have a very long shelf life, and they get wonderful oils that they can trust. So I've always been, a big proponent of Now Foods and your essential oils. Thank you.
Well, yeah, holidays have often been one of the big seasons for essential oils because people are making these things and they're tending to diffuse more in the winter. Do you remember what the scent is in baby powder, traditional baby powder?
Mm-mm.
Rose and vanilla.
I don't.
Rose and vanilla.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I never would have gone there. Wow.
But some of the blends
Sometimes
we
the
have,
visual.
yeah, some of the blends we have were originally recipes that we published on our webpage and had tarot cards and things in the stores. But they were so popular, there was a demand, and we ended up with maybe a dozen of them that we came out with these pre-made blends. Now, something else we do on some of the expensive oils, like the Rose Absolute or Jasmine Absolute, we actually blend them with jojoba oil. And one of the reasons we use jojoba oil is not only what I mentioned earlier, but it's extremely stable. We used to use grapeseed oil in there, and grapeseed oil is more prone to oxidation, to going rancid. So you have a tremendous stability in jojoba oil, but it also doesn't convey its own scent. And grapeseed oil is a good one for not having a scent, but it's not as stable long term if you want to get several years dating on there and have it be keep. Now, when you use a diffuser, let me add before I go into that. When we have a blend, we put right on the front of the label what percent it is, like 7.5% in a base of jojoba oil, 5% in a base of jojoba oil, 15%. So it's not hidden. It's disclosed that it's a blend. Some of our blends are like that, where it's a blend of essential oil in a carrier oil, jojoba oil typically. Some of our blends are blends of essential oils, like the Nature's Shield I mentioned earlier, where it's all essential oils. There's no carrier oil. There's no jojoba oil or other oil in there. So these are all clearly labeled on the package. We also mentioned the production methods. Is it steam distillation, cold pressing? We'll list if it's organic, certified organic or not. And when I talk about it being organic, you do not expect to get pesticides in essential oils. I refer in my presentation on essential oils to a large study that was from Europe, and they took the results of 70 plus thousand quality tests on essential oils, and only about 0.5% had any detectable pesticides on these essential oils. It is very rare to find pesticides in essential oils because pesticides are not volatile. They're not water soluble. They're not heat stable for distillation. They're not designed to evaporate quickly. They're designed to stay there. So they're left behind. Even on the cold press, because you're washing the fruit rinds and stuff, you're very unlikely to find any pesticides. Now, that said, I know of 2 instances this year of certified organic essential oils that we receive that we test for pesticides. We test every botanical for pesticides at least once a year from every supplier. And for some susceptible products, we test every incoming lot for pesticides. We are the only company testing routinely our botanical ingredients, whether it's essential oils, foods, personal care products, supplements for pesticides. And if it's organic, there's a zero tolerance. So 2 we rejected this year, and the supplier comes back with the same, different suppliers, they come back with the exact same response. Why are you testing for pesticides? They're certified organic. This is why we're finding it. We don't trust, we test.
Yep.
So
like that.
there's
That's
no
the
real
quality
risk from the
control.
pesticides, but we want to make sure that we have a database. We have been testing our raw materials for pesticides since 2017. And as far as we know, we're the only manufacturer routinely testing every botanical ingredient for pesticides. Now, distillation's another issue. When you're distilling an essential oil, if you're using these blends that are like, 5, 10, 15% essential oil, jojoba oil does not evaporate. It's going to leave a ring in the diffuser that you'll have to wipe out. So that is, one thing people should be aware of. Now, our diffusers, and we sell a number of them, we're about to come out with a rechargeable. We're working on a rechargeable lantern version you can carry around with you.
Ooh, nice.
But our diffusers are using ultrasound. So there's a ceramic plate that vibrates and generates bubbles in there and builds up pressure in the chamber where there's a narrow opening, and it forces a stream of vapor out the top where the volatile oils are coming out, basically enrobing a micro droplet of water that's generated by the ultrasound. So you put a raw oil in there, it's still raw. You're not heating it. It bubbles up, but if you take the top off and stick your finger in, and I've done this, it's cold. It's not heat. It's safer around children. It's safe around pets. Typically, it will last at least 5,000 cycles. They've been tested. There's an office in Ohio you could call if you have any issues. The main issues people have with diffusers are they overfill them. They get water into the air intake slot. They don't clean out the residue if they're using these blends. Those are really the issues people have. These are really long lasting. I know people who are still using the original diffusers that we came out with 10 or 15 years ago.
I have 2 of those. They're still going strong.
Yeah.
So there you go. I really want to thank you for the clarity. I think the clarity is really important. And, I know we've talked about this many times, but I was really excited to do one on the podcast, and I really thank you for taking the time and for all you do and all your world travels and all the things you've done for this industry that people may not even know or get to appreciate because they don't know all you do. I mean, most of us do. But I thank you for all you're doing for this industry. And I think you've done remarkable things, and I'm so glad we're friends.
Well, you definitely are, and I'm always glad to have a nice conversation with you. And it is good to bring these issues out and make them available as well as clear to an audience, and that's something you do very well. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Okay, now my last 2 questions for you. The first one is, leave us with a thought for the day.
Well, thought for the day is to be kind to one another. And one thing is you don't want to overscent things. Some people are sensitive to scents. So when people are, I sometimes go into stores where people are diffusing and someone says, oh, what's that scent? But I've also heard customers say, oh, I can't stand that. And I often recommend that when they use a diffuser in a store, that they just put water in it and not actually put a scent in, so people can see how it works. They can see the vapor coming out, ask a question. Oh, why aren't I smelling it? But you can actually open it up, stick your finger in, look, it's bubbling. It's not hot. It's safe. You don't have to add a scent. You don't have to over scent things, but you have to be careful using these oils around children and pets. Cats are very insensitive to essential oils. Birds are very insensitive to essential oils. They can't stand them. Cats can get dermatitis from essential oils. Babies should not be alone in a room with an essential oil. Pets should not be alone where they can't leave the room if they're uncomfortable. So, there is some caution. These are very concentrated, just like pets can't eat chocolate or sugar alcohols. They don't all necessarily tolerate the essential oils the same way. And you don't want to, don't do it next to an open fish tank, because when the oil settles on the fish tank, you can suffocate all the fish in the tank. And I know at least 2 instances that have been reported to me, 3, but 2 from the same person, where it happened twice before she figured out what happened, where she suffocated her fish. She didn't have a cover on the fish tank, had the diffuser right next to it. That oil settled on top. Just a thin film was enough to kill the fish. So be kind to one another. Be kind to your pets.
I love it. Second question. What's the one thing that you would like to be remembered for after you leave this planet?
Helping people by explaining things, by educating, making a difference. People tell me that I've told them something that made an impact in their life. I help them use something or avoid something that just the education was helpful to them.
I've been talking with Neil Levin today. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Remember to bring your friends. Share these as soon as you go there. Make sure that everybody goes and listens to these wonderful interviews, because it really does bring a lot of great information. We want to stay on top of all the things that have to do with good health and well-being from inside and outside the natural products industry. Remember to go to my webpage, drjeffreyburke.com, tap on the Honest Health logo. It'll take you to all my platforms. Tap on the YouTube logo. It'll take you to YouTube. Remember to subscribe and follow and like and all that wonderful stuff. Neil, I want to thank you so much for being here today. Absolute pleasure, my friend, and I wish you well and safe travels upcoming.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Be healthy. And remember, check out all the Now Foods essential oils at your quality health food store near you.
Stay tuned for more information from the Honest Health Podcast with Jeffrey Burke. And make sure to check back often for interviews and conversations from the guests we all want to hear from. I'm John the Announcer. Thanks for listening.